everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk Podcast, joined by Phil A. Perry, our draft guru. Also, Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk will join us later in the program. Phil, let's not do a whole bunch of foreplay because we've been foreplaying for months, especially you. This draft, first round, I see chaos because of the number of teams with multiple picks and the number of teams who want to trade back. Your feeling on that?
Yeah. And so I guess my question is, will there be players who slip that force teams to want to trade up, right? So for there to be the chaos that you're talking about, it takes two to tango. And so you've got to be able to have teams that are willing to get aggressive in order to satiate the teams that are looking to build their draft capital for this particular draft, because we know the cream of the crop might be basically 15 players deep, maybe one or two more than that, depending on which team you're talking to. And then the next 20 or so, maybe even 25 players, Tom, are pretty similar in terms of talent. But then even after that, there's a third tier that I think teams believe is loaded with starters that might take us through the fourth round of this draft. So are you willing to get out of the back half of the first round to add a second and a third and a fourth, depending on what pick you're talking about here? That to me, I think will be fascinating. All the maneuvering or the potential maneuvering we may see Thursday.
The Patriots, obviously, with the 21st overall pick and then a boatload of picks, they've already made one deal with the Houston Texans in which they traded down and added later round picks. So they're collecting. Do you think they might be collecting with a purpose, Phil, especially since these are later round picks? I mean, they can't be targeting and saying, boy, round 7 is going to be loaded. Let's make sure we get as many 7th rounders as we can.
No, they can't. But I think this is a little bit of them hearkening back to a point in Bill Belichick's draft history where he hated the 5th round, hated it, refused to pick in the 5th round for really a long time. I mean, they went years, Tom, without a 5th round choice. And he's never told us why that is the case. But my belief is because the hit rate is so similar, 5th, 6th, and 7th round, generally, the earlier you pick, the better chance you have of finding a good player. Until you get to the end of day 3 in those last 3 rounds. When you're talking about high-end talent that ends up being found in those rounds, you're just as likely to find a guy as an undrafted free agent as you are a 7th round pick, as you are a 6th, as you are a 5th. So for Bill Belichick, if he looks at that and says, well, some other team is going to value this 5th round pick more than a 6th or a 7th, then I'll just load up with 6th and 7ths and I'll try to deal these away and get value in return. That's what I think this might be. And it wouldn't shock me. They still have 1/5 left, Tom. It wouldn't shock me if they tried to do away with that one too.
Wonder though, is there anything that plants a seed in your mind that this collecting of picks, you combine them, you mix them, you match them? I'm not saying teams are going to line up for the 7th round pick, but could the Patriots be at least girding their loins for a move upward? Because
I think so.
Yeah. And not maybe even in just round 1, but 2 or 3.
Or even 4. I mean, like when you talk about a 7th round pick, you go and look at the Jimmy Johnson trade chart or the Rich Hill trade chart, does a great job with that. Every time he updates that thing. And I believe he just came out with a new edition, but you're talking about just a couple of points, right? With a 7th round pick. But maybe that's the difference between you being able to make a move up a slot or 2. It's just about having ammo, Tom, and just having the flexibility to move in either direction based on what cluster of player is falling to you at a particular point in time. Bill Belichick has said many times, when you trade up, you do it with a specific player in mind. When you trade down, it's because you're looking at your board and you're saying, we like about 10 guys that are coming up here about the same. And if we can add some picks and still get one of those 10, we're happy with that. So that, I think, is what they're trying to do. Just stay flexible.
All right, let's do an exercise here. We've done it in the past, kind of fun. Again, I have given over my draft guru hat that I wore for a long time to Phil. I ran out of hard drive space for college seniors and juniors who declare for the draft a few years back. Phil still has plenty left. So I'm going to lean on Phil. I will give my input as well. But from Phil, I want to know, what do you think the Patriots should do, and then what they will do? Let's start with what should they do in round 1, based on it's not a prediction. it's what you would do if you were running the Patriots.
So the first thing I really would try to do, if the draft falls the way we're anticipating that it will, and I had pick number 21, I really would be working hard to trade back because of just how this draft is constructed. Odds are you're going to be at the top of that second tier of player. And if you can trade back and go all the way back into the 40s, Tom, you could still get a good player and add more picks in these rounds that we're talking about where you still may be able to land potential starters. So that's what I would be trying to do. But if they can't do that in round one, what I would be doing would be looking to fill my roster with premium positions or a premium position with that number 21 pick. So that would mean probably not a linebacker. It would mean probably not a safety. Certainly wouldn't mean a running back. But you're talking maybe a corner if Trent McDuffie falls, maybe a pass rusher, maybe a tackle. That's what I would be looking for in round one, just because of the value of those positions.
All right. And defining a premium position, you did a good job in your Next Pats podcast mock draft that you, myself, and DJ Bean did. What defines a premium position?
Well, right now it's basically based on the money that you would have to pay in free agency to get a serviceable player at that position. You can get a cheap linebacker who can give you starting caliber play.
Juwan Bentley,
for instance, who's going to make about $3 million per year on his new contract and give you starting caliber play. You can't find that at tackle. You can't find it at corner. You can't, oftentimes you can't find it at receiver.
No.
So those are the positions that I would be looking at because it's such a valuable bullet in the first round there. So Tom, for instance, I'll give you a couple names. There are a couple smaller school tackles that are really good athletes that I think could fall to number 21. There's Northern Iowa's Trevor Penning, who is a fantastic athlete, has all the size you would want. And then there's Bernard Ryman from Central Michigan, who's new to the position, but is already pretty technically sound. He is a brilliant human being. He's from Austria. He has a lot of similarities. It's not just because of where he's from, but he has a lot of similarities to Sebastian Vollmer. Sebastian Vollmer was a tight end, went to Houston, became a tackle, was pretty raw at the position, was new to the position, but a really smart guy. Ryman would give you a lot of the same qualities. So those would be the tackles that I think could make it to 21 that I would really strongly consider. And then the corner that I think has a chance, may not be a great chance, but has a chance of getting to 21 would be Trent McDuffie from Washington, who's a little bit undersized, but is everything they want. Versatile, smart. We talked about him on the Next Pats podcast with Albert Breer a couple weeks ago. Just a brilliant football player already, and is violent, is totally willing to tackle in the run game, which we know matters to Bill Belichick at that position. So those are a few names that I think, would give you quality at really expensive positions. So you're saving yourselves from being forced into paying for veterans at those spots, maybe next offseason or a couple off seasons from now.
If they were to travel upward, and they could with, for instance, Philadelphia and New Orleans, not saying jumping up an exorbitant amount, but if they wanted to move up to the late teens, mid-teens, they could do it with either of those teams, which are both out of the conference and easy trade partners with Loomis and Howie Roseman in charge of both of their draft rooms. Who would you think the Patriots could move up to see? I'm thinking of, again, it's unlikely he would drop, but a Kyle Hamilton type player, where everyone's going, he's a safety, man. He's a safety. Or a Derek Stingley. Or Jamison Williams. Those are non-premier positions, except for Stingley's. Could you see those being enticing for them to go non-prime position and move up for those unique players?
I could, because I think those guys are top 10 talents, Tom. And I think if the Patriots view that kind of value starting to fall to them, and it's the difference of, we'd have to look at our trade charts here now, but if you want to move from 21 to 18, it might cost you a third round pick. But would you be willing to do that to make sure you get a number one corner in Derek Stingley if for whatever reason he starts to fall? Would you do it for Jordan Davis, the nose tackle out of Georgia? I'm not sure I would, because that's another one. That's not a premium position anymore. It's just not. Defensive tackle, big bodies that are going to be great on first and second down. I think Davis could be great on third down too, because he's such a damn good athlete. But I'm not sure I would do that because of the position he plays. Same goes for Devin Lloyd. I know there are plenty of people that have him as a borderline top 10 player in this year's draft, but he plays linebacker, and it's a pretty deep class at linebacker this year. So there are some guys that are going to be really good talents that play spots that I think the Patriots might be able to fill a little bit later. Like I would rather have Travis Jones from UConn in the second round than Jordan trading up for Jordan Davis in the first. I would maybe rather have Troy Anderson from Montana State, who's this freak athlete at linebacker who played quarterback and running back in college, and he's raw. But I talked to a defensive assistant in the NFC the other day who said he has Brian Urlacher type of upside because he's that kind of player in terms of the height and the weight and the speed, and he's a brilliant guy. And so he's a little bit of an unknown right now because he just hasn't played the position all that much, but that might be what you're getting eventually. So I'd rather wait for him than trade up for Devin Lloyd, if that makes sense.
Got it. Or Chad Muma. You didn't mention my guy, Chad Muma. Who
I like Chad Muma too. And that's probably somebody you could wait even until you might even be able to wait until the third round to get somebody like Muma, who's going to be a good athlete and a hard worker, and he's going to play all your special teams right away.
He's a Sean Lee type. Correct?
He's not all that dissimilar from Logan Wilson, who he played with at Wyoming, who just started in the Super Bowl in the middle of that defense for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's probably a little bit better against the run, is my understanding, than Wilson. Wilson's probably a little bit better against the pass, but just a solid play him right away, feel totally comfortable about it type of guy.
And that's huge because play him right away is going to be vital for the Patriots at that second level. Second round, obviously, a million tumblers have to fall into place to make that happen. So just give me what you would do if you were a second round Patriots guy and you understand the level of talent that's already gone off the board by the time the Patriots pick arrives at where are they in number 2?
So they're 54 in round 2. And this is interesting to me because this would be a spot where I would maybe be looking to trade up, Tom, believe it or not, because that second tier,
it's a long drop.
It's a long drop. And it feels like that second tier will be gone if you wait until pick 54, right? So now, you're talking about maybe missing out in the first tier at 21 overall. You might miss out on the second tier. If you just wait and you sit and pick at 21 and 54, you might miss on tier 1 in the first round, and you might miss on tier 2 in the second round. I would be willing to make the kind of move that they made last year to get Christian Barmore, depending on who falls to them. And so I mentioned Trent McDuffie in the first round, be willing to, spend that pick there. But if you don't get the corner that you like in the first round, I think it's a position you should be trying to address relatively early. And there are going to be some guys that I think slip into the second round, Tom, whether it's Andrew Booth potentially from Clemson, maybe Kaiir Elam from Florida, Kyler Gordon from Washington. My understanding is a lot of people have him as a second round guy. Gordon, to me, McDuffie's teammate, would be worthy of a trade up because he is incredibly explosive. And again, he's a little bit young in terms of his overall experience level, starting in that Washington defense, but a phenomenal athlete and exactly the kind of athlete that Bill Belichick likes. Those agilities, those shuttle times are fantastic with him. And so I would be willing to trade from 54 to say 44 if he starts to fall, because again, it's a premium position. And I think if you wait till 54, you're not getting somebody of the same kind of talent level.
4.5 is what one betting site has it now for the over-under on cornerbacks drafted in round 1. So you're going to be looking at the 5th or 6th or 7th cornerback off the board when the Patriots might draft, if they did that at 44. So yeah, I mean, eventually you're going to get to a point where, the class is not loaded with top tier talent at that position.
Right. Gordon, I just want to say one more thing about Gordon. Gordon ran a 4.5 at the combine. He was widely considered a first round pick before the combine. So he runs a slow time, which granted, that should maybe drop you down the board a little bit, but then he goes to his pro day and he lights it up at his pro day. So are you willing to trust the tape that he's an unbelievable athlete and then he flies and he plays special teams and he's a gunner and he's, beating everybody down the field? I think that's the kind of player like Barmore, who is a first round talent who might fall into the second round.
Good deal. And finally, round 3, John Mechie.
He's lock him in, right? I feel like if I had to bet on the Patriots taking a player this year, it would be, and get it right, it would be John Mechie.
Just like Hunter Renfrow or George Kittle.
But you know what? Hunter Renfrow came from Clemson, and the Patriots don't draft guys from Clemson. So the Mechie thing just makes way too much sense. But Tom, what I might do here, if I get a tackle in round 1, because you just don't find those guys outside the first round. And I think you're going to need one probably this year because one of your two guys is let's face it,
Bound
maybe going to get hurt and maybe miss some time. And so maybe round 2, you get your corner. So now you got 2 premium positions filled. Round 3 is when I would be looking at the Chad Mumas of the world. And I would be looking at the linebacker position because I think you can get some speed there in round 3, whether it's Muma, really good athlete. Christian Harris is an Alabama guy who's only 226 pounds. He will light you up in the running game because he's so explosive and he loves contact, but he also gives you that speed element that you need to run with backs and tight ends and maybe spy Josh Allen. He just feels like a really good Patriots fit, and he might be a guy who's available in the 3rd round.
A great point on Josh Allen, and we shouldn't lose sight of that fact. What do the Patriots have to do? What did we talk about after the season began, going into free agency repeatedly? The Patriots have to set as their goal, and do set as their goal, winning the division. How do you win the division? You compete with Miami. You compete with Buffalo. You have to match speed on Stephon Diggs and now on Tyreek Hill. You have to match athleticism at the 2nd level with Josh Allen. So that is the coin of the realm for the Patriots in this draft. You can't just sit there and take, we need an offensive lineman and, a guard, which I fully am on board with. But you got to import speed. And I don't know if they've imported enough speed aside from Mac Wilson at the 2nd level of their defense. Otherwise, they're just saying, okay, Josh, you're up. You've been sitting there for 2 years, ready to go, Josh Uche. Start sprinting around like a maniac and making plays. So to me, you have to match up to your division before you worry about BPA, best player available. It's the best player available at a certain spot where you are needy. And the Patriots do have spots where they're needy. You know what? I said what they will do and what they should do. Whatever it was.
That was me going with what I think they should do.
No, I know.
Receivers there.
I think what they will do is almost redundant to it because they're so unpredictable. Why would I do it? Go ahead.
Well, here's the thing. Just based on some of the conversations I've had, I could totally see them going with a linebacker early. But I don't know if it's going to be Devin Lloyd, who might get to them at number 21 overall, and I think is a fit in a lot of different ways. I think he would help them sort of modernize their defense and modernize that position because of his length. I've heard comparisons to Fred Warner in San Francisco, have heard comparisons to Darius Leonard, though he's a little heavier than Darius Leonard in Indianapolis, two really, really highly paid linebackers right now. But there is a guy that I think, Tom, is going to be exactly their kind of guy. And I think to get him, you'd have to get him in the 1st round. Probably would rather not get it at 21, get him at 21. Probably would love to move back and still have him available to you. It's Quay Walker from Georgia. Conversations I've had, Tom, I would say 2 things. Number 1, I feel pretty confident he's actually going to get drafted ahead of his teammate, Nakobe Dean, who's the bigger name and is the more decorated player coming out of Georgia and was really the alpha among a lot of alphas on that historic Georgia defense. But I think Quay Walker is going to get drafted earlier, and I think he is going to get drafted in the 1st round. He's 6'4", 241 pounds, tons of upside, still learning the position a little bit because he only started for a year plus, but unbelievably tough, violent, really high ceiling, which is something that Nakobe Dean really doesn't have based on, some of the coaches and scouts that I've spoken to. And so you put all of what he brings to the table, the size, the speed, the toughness. He could play the mic is my understanding. He could call the defense. He just didn't because Nakobe Dean was probably a little bit more natural at it. I think the Patriots would love Quay Walker. You factor in the connection too, right, to the program and Kirby Smart and all that. And there are some similar concepts that Georgia uses that the Patriots would use that would be familiar to him. So I could see them going linebacker, even though I wouldn't. And I could see them doing it with Quay Walker.
All right. You know what? Let's bring in Florio. We've been riding you like a mule all week, and great content. Again, to revisit some of the names that Phil has mentioned here. It's Quay Walker. It's Bernard Raymond, Trevor Penning. Those are different players that Phil has mentioned right now. Derek Stingley and some of those that I lobbed out there were more unlikely players who could drop. But obviously, stick with us for the rest of the week. Stick with Phil on the next Pats podcast. We will be back most likely on Thursday. TBD on what we're going to bring you, whether we should come to you in the late afternoon via Instagram, whether we put out a pod earlier in the day, whether we just leave that Patriots mock draft out. But stick with us. Watch your feed. Watch your feed. and get ready to go. Here's Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk coming up. Here is the esteemed Mike Florio. You know him from Pro Football Talk. You know him from NBC Sunday Night Football. You might know him as an author of The Playmakers, which has recently been released and is tearing up the charts. Before we get into your interesting proposal for fixing the NFL draft, i.e. abolishing it, what's Playmakers all about? And what are some of the Patriot-related hooks that are in that book?
Well, Playmakers looks at the last 20 years in the NFL through a series of anecdotes, controversies, issues, different specific stories that when you look at how they ultimately were handled by the NFL, it creates a mosaic. Somebody used that word, and I like it, so I'm running with it. A mosaic of how the NFL truly operates, both good ways and bad ways, things that can be improved, things that it does well, and it gives you an understanding of all the different issues that have popped up in the NFL over the past 2 decades. The Patriots show up in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Spygate 1, the quickly aborted or eventually aborted Spygate 2, the Boston Herald escapade right before Super Bowl 42, the Deflategate. That's our longest chapter in the book. The chapters are short, easily digestible, quick to read, but there's a lot there in Deflategate, some new reporting we've discussed in the past on Deflategate, and other things about the Patriots. They've been such a key part of the landscape of the NFL for the past 20 years that inevitably there's going to be chapters about Bill Belichick and basically how so many of these other coaches, since they can't compete with him, they resent him, and it's manifested itself in accusations of cheating. It can't be that he's just better than us. He has to be cheating.
And the league does too. I mean, the league, because of the way in which the Patriots rose to prominence and perhaps the cut of their jib while they were getting there, created a lot of bitterness. Let's get to a proposal. You and I did PFT on Monday for a couple of hours, and you have mentioned something many of us have thought of. Look, drafting a kid who succeeds and is at the top of his would-be profession and telling him, you're going to go work here for this long and you have no real choice in the matter is kind of un-American, but that's what the NFL draft does. You got a better solution?
Well, I do, but it's never going to be implemented because the draft is too big to die. They're not going to do away with the draft because if there was a different arrangement where the players actually got some say and had an opportunity to select based upon geographic location or opportunity or contract that was offered, or I want to work with this coach, or I want to play with these players, whatever factors would drive the decision the player makes. Not everybody's going to pick the closest team to home, but that process of unveiling the selections would never be as compelling, would never be as organized, could never be something that would be crafted the way that the draft is. It would be the equivalent of the high school players having the piecemeal press conferences where they're sitting there with a bunch of hats and they pick one and they put it on. It would never happen Tuesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern, broadcast worldwide by ESPN and NFL Network. Right. It would they'd never be able to make that work. They wouldn't keep it under wraps, and you couldn't control it the way you can control the draft, where you tell all 32 teams this is what
every kid's going to want to play for the Raiders and the Cowboys and the Patriots, though. How do you fix it so that the Raiders, Cowboys, and Patriots don't get all the players?
Well, you use a salary cap within the salary cap. You have a specific allocation of dollars available to attracting rookies based upon how well you've done. If you want competitive balance to be honored, and look, back in the 70s, when the league was run by the Steelers, the Dolphins, the Raiders, and the Cowboys, they supposedly had competitive balance through the draft, and it didn't matter. Didn't matter then. The bad teams had dibs, and it didn't matter. And you didn't have free agency. You had those guys forever unless you traded them or cut them, and it didn't matter. So I'm not a big believer that competitive balance flows from this. But if we want competitive balance, let's limit the dollars available to the best teams, have more money available to the worst teams. And also, I hear that all the time. And I think you're just making the point to draw out my response. I don't think you believe this. Why would you want to go play for the Cowboys right now if you're a quarterback? They have their quarterback in Dak Prescott. Why do you want to go somewhere and sit on the bench? This isn't Oklahoma in the 1970s where Barry Switzer is going to recruit 7 blue chip 5-star talents and convince them to not play. You're going to go where you can play. You're going to go where you get paid. You're going to go where the opportunity is and where you see a spot to get your way, not just great training, but get your way onto the field. That's why I always say, we had this conversation yesterday about Tom Brady at pick number 199. He wanted to be drafted. He wanted to be validated. By the time you get that late in the draft, you're better off not being picked, because then you get to choose where I start my career, where I'm going to go get the best possible training, where I'm going to get the best possible opportunity. Yeah, you're not going to get a lot of money early on, but you're not going to get a lot of money if you're a late 6 or anywhere in round 7 draft pick. So that's how I think it would shake out. And the people who don't want the draft to go away, who love the experience of seeing the commissioner walk out to the podium, get booed, announce the pick, lather, rinse, repeat all night long on a Thursday night, they don't want to give that up. And they're brainwashed into believing that that's the only way. And everybody is brainwashed. Everybody, the players, they just accept it. Everyone that you interview. Well, you try to push back at all. Well, that's just the way it is. I did wherever I go. I'm going to be happy wherever I go. It's just an honor being nominated. They're programmed to say that, and it's never going to change.
It's funny. The only other draft that I can really prominently think of is one where you get shot at, and this one you get run over for the foreseeable future. We're maybe talking about this in part because this draft beginning Thursday is really kind of at the top. It's deep. A lot of teams are going to get much better because there's a lot of top tier talent, but there's not as much elite talent. So all that said, and with the number of teams owning multiple first round picks and 2 fairly prominent quarterbacks in Baker Mayfield and Jimmy Garoppolo, who could move elsewhere, additionally the Deebo Samuel domino, could we see a very chaotic first round, Mike?
Oh, I think we could. You know, plenty of teams would love to trade down. You have to find teams that are willing to trade up. But I think some teams may be thinking about trading up. Look, if I'm the Steelers and I love one of these 2 quarterbacks, why am I sitting there and staying put at 20 and risking getting jumped by someone else? We've seen the Steelers in the past move to go get guys they love. They moved up to get Troy Polamalu. They moved up to get Santonio Holmes, who would go on to become a Super Bowl MVP. They moved up a couple of years ago to get Devin Bush. That's who they wanted. They went to get him. So we could see some teams making a move. I'm fascinated by the interplay between the Chiefs and the Packers. They both trade away number 1 receivers. Both have multiple first-round picks. Packers are up first at 22. Will the Chiefs try to jump them? Will the Packers move before they get jumped? Because the Packers got jumped for Brandon Ayuk a couple of years ago when they wanted him, receiver that ended up with the 49ers, and then their next plan was to go get Jordan Love, and we know what that did to the Packers. So there's a lot of a psychology that flows here, and yeah, I think it could be very chaotic. And once teams don't get the guys they want, if they can't get the guys that they've targeted, that's when, especially at quarterback, some of these other options come into play, like Baker Mayfield and Jimmy G.
The quarterback climate is so interesting in the NFL. You've got Malik Willis as an opportunity for maybe Atlanta in the top 10 from Liberty. You have Trey Lance is sitting for the San Francisco 49ers, the 3rd overall pick. You have Zach Wilson. You have Trevor Lawrence. Those are players who've gone someplace and are not flourishing. The upshot of all of it is for these teams to seek out and find a quarterback, you're compelled to do it, but it's also like walking the plank in some regards. If you're a team on Thursday or Friday, would you rather try and go get that known entity to a degree in Jimmy G or Baker Mayfield and say, at least I know what the floor is, or take the chance on a guy that you can have 5 years of control over, presumably?
Depends upon what my job within the organization is. If I'm the coach or the GM and I'm feeling the hot seat a little bit, I'm more likely to go with somebody that's got the known floor. If I'm the owner and I'm not concerned about not being employed in a few years when the team could be back in a position to draft a quarterback again, I'm willing to swing the bat and take the chance on the quarterback. And that's the one factor that gets so overlooked as we get closer to the draft. The influence of the owner. The owner likes to be able to say, the classic owner, the typical owner, not the Jerry Jones who just drops the pretense and becomes the GM, but the classic owner wants to be able to say, I don't interfere with football operations. Well, the billionaire's privilege means you don't have to interfere with football operations. There's a way to make it known what you like without telling people what to do. And that's why you mentioned the Falcons and Malik Willis. I think Arthur Blank put his thumb on the scale in 2008 when they drafted Matt Ryan after the Mike Vick disaster and they needed a new face of the franchise. Now, Matt Ryan's gone. Marcus Mariota's not the answer there long-term. He's not the answer short-term, all due respect. I could see Arthur Blank, a little nudge, a little push toward Malik Willis. And if it doesn't work out, well, you blame it on Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith. If it doesn't work out, you'll have a different coach and a different GM, and you'll be drafting another quarterback in a few years. But that's the guy to watch in so many of these teams, the owner. And they'll want to hide, even if it's hide behind the homeless guy who told me to take Johnny Manziel. They'll want to hide. But they're the ones to watch because they're the ones that tip the scales, especially in round one.
And the most fascinating dynamic locally as we get ourselves enmeshed in all the picks and the possibilities, the overriding interest in New England here is the fact that Robert Kraft has put his thumb not necessarily on the scale, but on the shoulder of Bill Belichick and said, perform like you did last year. I know that you're the greatest coach of all time. I appreciate all you've done. Perform. That to me is one of the great subplots to the 2022 draft is that you have the Patriots and all Bill Belichick's accomplished and what's become, perhaps maybe even a slog to try and catch Don Shula and to prove a post-Brady success rate that approaches what Brady's done elsewhere. But Robert Kraft is exercising some pressure on Bill Belichick to perform.
Very easy to have peace and harmony when you get into the Super Bowl every other year. It becomes more of a challenge when you've gone 3 years without winning a playoff game, and Robert Kraft has been willing to come out and say that publicly, and he's also expressed his concern about the drafting and the development of young players. So, yeah, when the team slides toward the middle of the pack, when you see the Bills rocket past you, when you see the Dolphins nipping at your heels and maybe 1 year away from luring Tom Brady to South Florida, you get a little antsy. Look, you develop a taste for fine wine, and the Patriots have developed that taste. And now they're not necessarily nursing a bottle of Mad Dog, but they're back to the $20 a bottle cab. They want to go higher end again. And it's like I said, it's easy to be very supportive when things are going very well. It becomes more of a challenge when it's not resulting in the kind of accomplishments that you're used to.
So is Robert Kraft an ingrate, or is he just holding Bill Belichick to the standards that he holds his own players to?
I would say it's the latter. Hey, look, Bill Belichick wouldn't have been the coach there for 20 years if he wasn't as good as he was. Nobody's going to last that long if you're not as good as you are. It's not, the cliche popped up with the onset of free agency and the salary cap. What have you done for me lately? That's not the cliche that should be applied to the NFL. The cliche should be, what are you doing for me right now? And what can I expect you to do for me tomorrow? That's all that matters. And I don't know how many years before Bill Belichick is on the hot seat. And it's even weird to formulate that thought and articulate that string of words. But yeah, winning 6 Super Bowls does not give you the ability to go 15 years and just kind of wander in the wilderness and not put something together, especially when the guy they floated on an iceberg from a player standpoint has won 1 Super Bowl and may win another.
Mike Florio, that's why we have you on. Great stuff. Appreciate you very much. Good luck with the book. Good luck with the rest of the week. Thanks, Mike.